Welcome to Thinking Like a Lawyer with your hosts Elie and Joe Patrice, talking about legal news and pop culture, all while thinking like a lawyer. Here on Legal Talk Network.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I am rejoined for the first time in several weeks by my co-host, Elie. How are you?
Hey, I'm here today, guys. What's up?
Yeah, well, I mean, not much. How are you?
Well, last week I was on vacation. Well, it was more of a staycation, but I just needed to unplug. So I was playing a lot of Elite Dangerous last week.
Is that the code name that you like a corporate deal, the code name you have for your book proposal?
Yeah.
Because that was what you were supposed to be working on.
Right. It's a game about flying around in space.
Right, but instead you played video games.
Yes.
Yeah, that's about right.
And then 2 weeks ago I was having a bad race day. So
well, right. Fair enough.
I needed a second.
Mm-hmm. So
but I'm back now.
Excellent. Well, welcome back.
Back and blacker than ever.
Welcome back. So what all is going on in your world today?
So yesterday I was in the office because I was doing a quick TV spot. So I actually stopped by work, which is rare for me, and I went downstairs to the
Trust me, as your coworker, I know.
I went downstairs to the bodega to buy myself a pack of Parliaments because I am a child of the 90s and I'm a smoker, and I walk in. Now, I used to buy the vape stuff from this same bodega. I haven't in a while because the powers that be in our office have decided that vaping is frowned upon in this establishment.
Literally going back to the original episode of this show, I believe, when I discussed that no, it's actually always been illegal in New York.
So I haven't vaped in this office for quite some time,
everyone thanks you.
But the bodega guy still, he knows who I am. And so when I walk in yesterday here in New York State, the bodega guy goes, "Oh, my friend, we cannot sell you the vapors only for 2 more weeks." And I just go, "Well, I can still buy regular cigarettes, of course." Of
course.
And he goes, "Of course, my friend."
Yeah.
Which is why we fail as a goddamn country.
Right.
Now, I am not here to defend smoking. What I do to my body is bad and cancerous and will lead to my death. I tend to enjoy the personal freedom to make my own choices for self-destruction. But if the New York State is going to ban something, how in the hell are we not banning cigarettes as opposed to vape pens? Or just ban them all together? Yeah. I mean, if we care about people's health so much that we're going to take personal choice away from them, let's take away the personal choice that is actually killing people, which is the frickin' cigarettes, as opposed to just the candy-flavored vape pens, which parents are getting their panties in a bunch over because like little teenage kids are smoking cotton candy vape pens.
Yeah.
And as long as we're banning stuff,
Sure.
There's also, guns. We could also ban that. I'm just saying.
Right.
If we're on the banning train.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, and this sounds a little bit conspiracy theory, but on some level, conspiracy theories can occasionally stumble into the truth. And it's true that a lot of the vaping companies have now had controlling interests bought in them by, cigarette manufacturers, and they now have a vested interest in not fighting to defend vapes because they were competition. And you might think, oh, well, they own some shares of this, so aren't they protecting it? And it's like, because the profit margin is smaller on those. They're more complex. It's easier to go to cigarettes. Right. So, yeah. So that probably has a lot to do with it. But, while we're talking about bad things you can medicinally do to your body and how there's corruption involved in that and the need to do things, see how this is kind of a seamless transition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost like we thought about it
first.
No,
yeah. And trust me, if you've listened to this show before, there has been no thought about any of this before we did it. But we wanted to check in on a legal crisis that's out there and is making news that we haven't really touched too much upon. And what's that?
That would be the opioid crisis, or as black people like to call it, the usual shit. Specifically from a legal angle, though, we want to talk about Purdue Pharma.
I thought the black people take was to look at white people and go, see, this is what we've had to deal with before. I'm sorry that you finally figured this out. But because...
Oh, it's a disease now.
Oh, is it a disease now?
How convenient.
Yeah. So to do that, we here at Above the Law, we have a sister website called MedCity News that covers this. So we decided to bring on Alaric Dearment from MedCity News to talk with us a little bit about it from the medical reporting side of things, and we'll talk from the legal side, and we'll do some opioiding.
Great.
Is that a word?
No,
Welcome,
but it could be.
Welcome to the show. So,
Thank you.
First of all, just for our listeners who are not following this kind of news all the time, just give us a brief overview of what Purdue Pharma is, because before this started happening, I thought Purdue made chickens. And apparently they're into more than that.
That's not even spelled the same.
Yeah, I think the chicken company's PER.
Yeah, it's more like the university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, like the Boilermakers.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought Purdue made bad football.
Yeah. Harsh.
But I had a great engineering school, apparently. Yeah, so basically Purdue Pharma is based up in Stamford, Connecticut, owned by the Stackler family. And they're the company that makes Oxycontin, which is a long-acting form of oxycodone, which is an opioid painkiller that's been on the market for ages and ages.
So why are they in trouble now? Because Oxycontin seems like I've had it when I had my gallbladder out, about 15 years ago. I had Oxycontin at that point. It helps.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
my-
Because I find a lot of the things you do to be particularly galling. So I thought you still had that. I'll be here all week, folks.
Such a dick. So why is Oxycontin bad all of a sudden?
Well, Oxycontin is not inherently bad. I mean, if it's being used the way it's supposed to be used, then it's a perfectly fine drug. The problem is that what the company is accused of doing, and what other opioid makers are accused of doing, is essentially promoting improper use of the drug. You know, getting doctors to prescribe it more often than they should, and getting people hooked on it, because it is an opioid and it's very highly addictive.
And you hit on a legal concept that's kind of important for those who haven't done a lot of litigation involving stuff like the FDA. But prescribing it for uses that it's not meant to be prescribed for is the real bread and butter of this kind of litigation. Because drugs are approved for certain purposes. It's not like you say, oh, this drug is fine. Well, I guess you do kind of in the over-the-counter side. But when you're in the prescription world, it's approved very situationally. And it's on the doctors to make sure that it's used in those proper forms. And that's what the FDA is there to do. And when companies are reaching out and doing ad campaigns to encourage off-label prescriptions, that's a problem. Because doctors can prescribe things off-label.
Correct.
But they can't be told to be doing that or incentivized for it.
Yeah. So basically, there was another opioid company that was involved in a scandal as well called Insys. Their founders...
Incest?
No, Insys.
Insist.
Insys.
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 Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Insys. Insys as in system.
See, let's be very clear. We're going to make fun of almost all of these companies as they come out because they all have ridiculous names. But on that note, Purdue... actually one of the more normal ones. All right, let's move on. Insys.
Yeah, so, several of their founders actually were found guilty in court because they promoted off-label prescribing of a form of fentanyl that is approved for treating breakthrough cancer pain. But what they did is they got a bunch of pain doctors to prescribe it for, other pain issues that are not related to cancer. So... It's kind. I mean, it is a bit of a fine line. I mean, so a doctor legally can prescribe a drug for anything, but they have to do it within ethical boundaries and according to, data.
Yeah.
It has to be grounded in actual science. A company cannot promote drugs for off-label use. That's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joe, and you've kind of touched on this already, but can you explain why aren't the doctors the ones being sued if they're the ones writing the scripts for off-label use as opposed to the pharmaceutical company? Like, why aren't I going after Dr. Feelgood, who's prescribing me Oxycontin because, I got a blister?
I mean, while doctors can get in trouble for this, the real crux of this issue is the off-label promotion. And while I wasn't involved in any of this opioid stuff, I have been a lawyer involved in cases like this before.
You are from the Midwest, so I'm sure you've done some.
only been a lawyer in New York City, but I hear what you're trying to do. But there was a rash of instances like this several years ago where pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies, because this also applies to them, these rules apply to them too, would regale, shall we say, doctors with trips and junkets and golf things and stuff like that.
Like when they took Dr. Richard Kimball's friends to Provasic, took them on the fishing trip, right?
Provasic. You remember that company, but not that. Yeah, exactly. This is very much like The Fugitive. And what would happen is these trips, which are sales trips, and it's perfectly fine to sell your drug, but part of the discussion would be the FDA says you can't prescribe this for, using the fentanyl example, pain, but buddy, we took you out here for golf, and did you know it actually could help for that? And that sort of thing, that is a crime.
Well, I think an interesting thing to point out is that this whole multi-district litigation with in which Purdue is involved, it involves more than just Purdue. There's also Mallinckrodt. There's Johnson & Johnson. There's Endo Pharmaceuticals.
Johnson & Johnson, that's pretty normal.
And then, of course, there's also distributors, Amerisource Bergen, Cardinal Health, retailers like Walgreens. So there's a lot of different players here. I mean, Purdue is, obviously one of the bigger ones and the most infamous. But
right.
Can you just explain really quickly the difference between a pharmaceutical company like Purdue Pharma and a distributor? Like, what does a distributor do? Like, what?
Like the pharmacy.
Right. But, but when I think of pharmacy, I think of CVS.
Well, he didn't say Walgreens.
Yeah, Walgreens is involved. They're a retail pharmacy. Distributors are the ones that distribute the drugs. I mean, and the pharma companies are the ones that actually develop and produce the drugs.
So they've been sued. They lost big time. And so they filed for bankruptcy, right? To kind of protect themselves from the lawsuit.
Yeah.
So for people, again, who aren't now bankruptcy attorneys, and by the way, with a recession on the way, y'all should consider being bankruptcy attorneys.
I mean, it's going to be a growth industry.
You guys are going to be fine. But for people who are not bankruptcy attorneys or don't really understand bankruptcy law, one of the reasons why you file for bankruptcy is that it's not so much just to limit your liability, it's to order the payouts of your liabilities, right? So like your investors get paid off first, then a bunch of other stakeholders, and then you only kind of get at the very end to the people who've actually been hurt by your litigation. Your litigation losses count as a debt against your company, but it's a debt that has to stand in line against a whole bunch of other debts. And so when a company like Purdue files for bankruptcy, the people who are likely to get screwed are the people who should have won money from the settlement. Which brings us to the Sackler family, which is, I'm assuming, rich people who own... So who are they?
So they're the ones who own Purdue Pharma, and they have pledged to pay $3 billion of their own money toward this proposed settlement from Purdue, which would be worth, $10 billion and maybe even up to like $12 billion. Some of the
their use of the term "their own money" though is pretty interesting. Though.
Well, what's interesting about it is that Letitia James,
that's the New York State Attorney General.
Yeah. So she found that apparently they had transferred like about $1 billion or something like that to Swiss bank accounts.
As one does.
Yeah, as one does. So that kind of complicates the whole effort because, I think some of the attorneys general are, okay with the settlement, but then a bunch of them are also opposing it, like Letitia James and the ones in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
So some of the dirt on the Sackler family is that, this is Purdue Pharma is a family-owned business that they have been raiding for generations, reaping the profits of the business. And they've done it in a very kind of standard way where, the company pays out money and then the Sacklers take the profits of the company and put it in their bank account. So when the company goes bankrupt, a lot of what should have been Purdue's kind of financial cushion for a large settlement has already been raided by the Sackler family. The legal issue at play here is really to the extent to which state attorney generals can pierce the veil and go after the Sackler money directly in order to pay off Purdue's debts, as opposed to keeping all of the debts focused solely on the Purdue Pharma company, which is bankrupt.
I mean, yeah. I mean, this is always the question with piercing the corporate veil. Like, the economy works better because we allow there to be a corporate veil that separates individual owners from the company's assets. It allows people to take risks that they wouldn't otherwise do if they thought their entire livelihood would go under if they gambled it on a business. These are the reasons we have this. That said, there are perhaps too onerous blockades to getting past that when people really are basically merged with the business, and they are not really, this is my separate business from my livelihood, but it is them. They are really just the actor themselves. And so that's what you're arguing for, is that in this case they may be that. And they may or may not, but that's what Elie's talking about.
Do you have a prediction on how that's going to fall?
My guess is that the splitting of the baby will be that, yes, there's a corporate veil. These folks aren't individually liable for any of this. However, these most recent transfers were fraudulent transfers, given that they knew that a bankruptcy was going to happen, and therefore those transfers have to go back. Yeah. That's my guess as to how a judge would cut this up, because there are rules against. Basically, you can't, if you know you're about to go bankrupt, you can't start moving money so that you don't have to pay it. That would defeat the purpose of bankruptcy rules. So we have provisions to claw that back.
Yeah. The other thing we wanted to talk to you about today, Alaric, is I was reading on your website, there's a new peanut allergy drug. This is important in my little life because I have 2 children. And while my children are thankfully food allergy free, you know, you can't go to a school lunch or a field trip or whatever without getting bombarded with, don't bring nuts! You're killing the children with your peanuts! And, like, it's a big freaking thing. My kids...
Peanuts are legumes.
My peanut, you know... And then there are also the parents who's like, oh, is there gluten in that cake? Bitch, I don't know. It's a goddamn cake. I assume so. Yeah. Sorry, my kid's birthday party is this weekend, and I'm just... I'm feeding 30 kids with their own, 30, relatively speaking, upper middle class kids with all their different fucking, issues is annoying, yet also terrifying because God forbid you put the wrong thing with the wrong kid and whatever, and there's a serious allergic reaction on your watch, like you would feel horrible. So as much as it's...
would you? Sorry, that probably was me. I may be different here. Go on.
I would feel horrible if some child came to my son's birthday party and left in an ambulance because of something that was in the food. So obviously you're taking it all seriously. But that's why I noticed the peanut allergy thing. Because if there was just a pill, you just give all the kids and be like, all right, now have a Snickers. Yeah. Like that would be the best of all worlds.
Yeah, so Palforzia, that's the name. And basically...
Palforzia!
Again, I don't understand where this whole industry comes up with its names. There's some, like, random letter generator out there.
Well, there's quite a lot that goes into it, believe it or not. Yeah, they have to spend quite a bit coming up with drug names because, the FDA requires that it cannot sound like the name, the brand name of a drug that's on the market, and it cannot sound like the generic name of a drug that's on the market. So they usually, there's a bit of art and science that goes into it. I mean, sometimes it'll be some reference to the disease that it's treating or the active ingredients or things of that nature.
This is also very much a patent issue, right? You can't have this be named something, and it's a trademark issue. You're selling it under these trademarks. Yeah. This is reminiscent of, for those who've seen the South Park episode where they spend a good deal of time coming up with more and more egregious names, trying to see if it's already been trademarked. And I believe they ultimately come up with a pair of balls placed menacingly on the table is the only company name that was not previously trademarked. Actually, that episode, for those, if you do remember this episode, because that episode's actually a very good episode if you're interested in the law, because Cartman's scheme is entirely legal and was under the prevailing laws of the time, and was entirely ingenious, which was he then renamed the company Washington Redskins because the football team did not have a valid trademark at that time, given the way the courts had been, and so he said, we could use that.
Okay, so Palforzia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it gonna make my child's birthday party better?
So basically, what happened is that the drug underwent review by an FDA advisory committee. So the FDA convenes advisory committees of outside experts, physicians, patient advocates, biostatisticians, when there's some uncertainty about a drug. Maybe there's some controversy about it, they just need outside expertise. So the advisory committee voted 7-2 in favor of the drug's safety efficacy, or in favor of the drug's efficacy profile, and 8-1 in favor of its safety profile, meaning that it is essentially telling the FDA, you can go ahead and approve this drug. Now, the FDA...
It works and it's not going to kill anybody.
Yeah. So basically, the FDA is not required to follow the advice of advisory committees. It usually does. Sometimes when the advisory committee says yes, the FDA says no. Sometimes when the advisory committee says no, it still says yes. But usually if the advisory committee says this is a good drug, the FDA will go along with that.
So my question here is, who wants the drug to happen and who doesn't, right? Because it seems to me that, planters would have a vested interest in making sure this drug is comes out, right?
I guess you could say that. I don't think that's really necessarily the reason, though, because, the idea is that the drug is mainly for accidental exposure. Like a kid comes to your child's birthday party and, consumes something that happens to contain peanut protein, and this will lessen the likelihood of an allergic reaction.
Is it a prophylactic, so you got to take it before the party, or is it like an EpiPen, you can take it after?
Well, neither. It's actually something that you would be taking regularly, and eventually you build up a tolerance.
Oh.
Yeah.
So then, Joe,
Yes.
if the kid shows up to my kid's party and Profosior is out and has been out for years and doesn't take Profosior and then gets all anaphylactic on me, do I have a defense because the parents should have been giving them Profosio? That's thinking like a lawyer, my friends.
Yeah.
Do I have a defense because the parent didn't do the de minimis level of protection of their kid from peanuts?
A de minimis level, this drug is inevitably going to be something that those parents probably don't have coverage for, and then we'll have to spend hundreds out of pocket for. So no, but go on.
Well, it is important to point out actually that there's what's called a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, and this is basically what a drug label will get when there's a lot in the way of, potential toxicities involved or other safety issues. So part of that REMS, as it's called, includes that patients who are on this drug have to have an EpiPen, or their caregivers have to have an EpiPen, because there is still a risk
backup.
of there is still a risk of allergic reaction. It's just a lessened risk of it.
If you still have to have the EpiPen, what the hell is the point?
And that is something that I think was sort of alluded to, which is that it is an extra expense. But then at the same time, eventually there is a lower risk of
That's a very batteries not included kind of bullshit toy.
Well, I don't know about that.
Wow. I mean, thankfully, I'm assuming you're not taking over America's healthcare.
Look, there's no peanuts. There's no peanuts at the party, and my wife, who is a saint on these things, has actually gone out of her way to make sure that we have gluten-free cupcakes.
Well,
Okay.
I will point out that I think, as I just mentioned before, the
Did I
vote
say that out loud?
the vote was 7-2. So in terms of the efficacy, and 8-1 in terms of safety. And there was one of the doctors who voted against the drug on both grounds.
both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he basically, he essentially said that the safety and efficacy profile of the drug do not support it. But, again, he was the minority opinion. So,
Well, cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Wish my kid a happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. So with that, we're going to move out of this subject. But thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
You should read MedCity News. You should read Above the Law, obviously. You can follow us on social media. I'm at Joseph Patrice. He's at Elie NYC. He's Biotech Visigoth, I believe, which is one of my favorite Twitter handles of all time. You should also listen to the entire offerings of the Legal Talk Network. You should give reviews to this podcast, subscribe to it, all that sort of stuff. Listen to the Jabot, Catherine's podcast. It's also her birthday, as it turns out, but whatever.
Also does not have peanut allergies.
Also does not. That's good. Anyway, with all that, we are done. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Peace.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. You can also find us at AboveTheLaw.com, ATLRedline.com, iTunes, RSS, Twitter, and Facebook. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.